This is a production of Cornell University.
I'm going to talk today in a general way about lichens that covers the whole field and tries to summarize in 50 minutes basically what lichenologists do and information about them. I want to start with a man named Guy Dirig, who was one of the pioneer lichenologists of North America, who self-published in 1947 the first manual of lichens in the Northeast called the Lichen Book. And he set the type, he did the art. He was a newspaper man and an essayist and also an editor of the American Rock Garden Society. And he worked also in plant breeding, including rhododendrons. And in fact, there's a pavilion at the Cornell Arboretum called the Neary Pavilion, named for him, where the rhododendron collection is. But he was an extremely good early lichenologist. And this is the beginning of his book. And because of the era and because of his training, he writes in a style called lyrical prose, which this passage encompasses sort of the whole field very quickly. The first paragraph of this book: lichens, though humble plants, engaged like other humble of this world in mighty tasks. Their part it is to cover the Arctic and Alpine wastes, to clothe desert rocks and bare cliffs everywhere, as pioneers carrying life and the means of existence where before no life could exist. Themselves needing no soil but a foothold merely, they create soil for plants which do need it. With powerful acids they etch the rock, loosening its particles to let in frost, which will disintegrate it further. Though surviving for centuries, their minute creeping ceases at last, and in death they give their decaying substance to the smaller and larger things, bacteria, moss, ferns, and flowers. Thus they lay down the beginnings of what may one day be fertile ground. And this book is, 600 some pages. Almost everything is illustrated. It's the first thing in North America and one of the few places in the world where someone coined common names for something as obscure as lichens. It's a very difficult discipline to get into and to teach yourself in terms of detail. I struggled for years with it by myself. And I'll talk a little more about what happened later. So that's Mr. Dirig. Now we need to talk for a minute about definition of lichens. The International Association for Lichenology in 1981 said that lichens were an association of a fungus and a photosynthesizing symbiont, resulting in a stable thallus of specific structure. So there are three common components there: the structure, the photosymbiont, and the microbiome. Then Neil Campbell, in a biology textbook, 1990, much more gently written, lichens are highly integrated symbiotic associations of millions of algal cells tangled in a lattice of fungal hyphae. So in the meantime, in the last few years, people have discovered that there are also yeasts associated with these. So this, of course, is a basidiomycete. Most of the lichen fungi are ascomycetes. The word lichen itself derives from the Greek language. Theophrastus in 300 BC used it to mean bark outgrowths on olive trees. And this has a derivative in modern medicine, which is known as the lichen planus, and also known as tumors. A little bit of history. In the 1500s AD, lichens were included in early herbals, including the lungwort, Lobelia pulmonaria, which we'll see later today. It's a megalichen. It's like this big. It grows on tree trunks usually. In the 1700s, the genus lichen was used by Tournefort and Linnaeus, and a man named Becarius founded the systematic study of lichens with the publication of his Methodist Lichenum in 1803. Thus, lichen names don't date from Linnaeus like most other things in the taxonomic realm. Lichen chemistry began to be studied by Alexander W. Evans at Yale University in the 1930s. He was also an hepatic ecologist who worked on liverworts. He lived to be 90 and he had 2 careers, basically. Also by the Japanese lichenologist Asahime Sharpen before. Physiological studies of the lichen symbiosis began in the 1950s, and then 10 years later we began to notice the effects of pollution, air pollution on lichen vigor and growth. They're important organisms to help monitor air quality. Manfeld in 1932 and Luttrell in 1951 began to integrate lichens into fungal classification systems. And since 1971, lichens have been included in the Index of Fungi and the Dictionary of Fungi. How many lichens? Erwin Brodo, who wrote a wonderful encyclopedia really called Lichens of North America that's beautifully illustrated with colored photos, and I'll show it to you in the lab this afternoon. It was published in 2001. He stated that there were about 14,000 lichens worldwide. Others have suggested a few more, and of these, 98% have as a microbiome ascomycetes, and the rest are basidiomycetes. I think we have one that I've seen locally. There are 2, I think, that are around here that are basidiolichens. And again, I'll show you some of these in the lab. In fact, this is one of the local ones. This is the club lichen, multiclavula lucida, and it was found at McLean Fox Preserve, which is one of the premier preserves that Cornell owns. It's out near Dryden. And the primary thallus here is a green alga, and the mycobiome, which belongs to the Clavariaceae, is rhythmically spaced, probably something to do with nutritional availability. We covered a whole dead log of a fallen big-toothed aspen tree that had sat in a wet area and was sort of soggy. So it was a fascinating kind of habitat to see it. I think it's the first time I ever found it. Now, it's interesting. Most groups of organisms are arranged by taxonomy, and we still do with lichens, but they're not really a systematic group, but rather an ecological or lifestyle choice within the fungi that cross many of the taxonomic units of fungi, and they're defined by their biology rather than their taxonomic identity. I think there's a flow up here. A lot of the ones in the upper triangle are lichenized. There's a little bit right there in the lichen auralis that are not lichenized, and some of the others are just partially lichenized. So it's just so you understand this concept. And the use of thin layer chromatography in recent decades has helped define knowledge of the species, and molecular work on lichens has also recently begun at Duke University and the Smithsonian. Now the scientific names, obviously you have two organisms living together, so what do? The scientific names, the genus and the species of the lichen, although referring to the symbiotic association, actually is the name of the fungal partner. And the mycobiome and the photosynthesizing partner of the photobiome also has its own taxonomic identity within green algae and cyanobacteria usually. Lichens are unique, remarkable organisms derived from species belonging to 2 or sometimes 3 biotic kingdoms. And I'm going to show you a gallery of images of them to give you, I hope, an appreciation of some of the colors and forms and so forth. They're very beautiful things in the landscape. They're often quite subtle. But once your eyes are open, you start seeing them everywhere, like everything else. They're slow-growing perennials, some of them very, very long life, like 4,000 or 5,000 years. This is a concentric ring lichen, which has the interesting name Arctoparmelia centrifuga, which is a northern boreal and Arctic lichen that grows on rocks. And this span is about a foot or 3 feet across. And they grow very, very slowly, and you see it has these concentric rings, which is it's where the name comes from. This is a cover of Audubon that showed some beautiful colors of lichens in the background. There's also Blight in there. So the photobionts, just very quickly, Trabuxia, which is a green alga, it's right, this little globose one, is a common genus of green alga, and nostoc is a common cyanobacteria, and used to be called blue-green algae, which are the major photobionts of local lichens. And it's interesting that the same species of, or at least genus of alga, green alga can be in numerous genera of fungi. And sometimes, if you're looking in different parts of the world, there'll be a different one, say in Central America from in Europe, in the same lichen. Just a list here of the genera that have been compiled until whenever, I think this book was written about 1980. You can see there's a large number of chlorophyte green algae. This is the one I mentioned, and nostoc is over there for the cyanobacteria, but there are other genera. Now this is the actual association of the fungus and the alga, green alga, where you have a single cell green alga being enveloped by the fungal hyphae. So just some nomenclature. Well, I have a sheet I'm going to give you this afternoon that lists a lot of the terminology. Of course, there's a specialized terminology like everything, but this one isn't too hard to learn. So symbiont is the partner in symbiosis. Microbiome, you understand, fungal partner of the lichen, photobiont, the one that photosynthesizes. And then if you want to get more detailed, the phycobiont is the algal partner, and the cyanobiont is a cyanobacterial symbiont. Some models of the symbiosis. Most lichens have surface, and particularly foliose lichens that are like leaves, have an upper cortex and a lower cortex, and a middle area which is filled with looser hyphae called the medulla. And the algal component ranges itself in a palisade under the cortex, but inside. And this is apparently to shield it from too much direct sun, which dries it out and kills it. And the lichen also is, the fungal part is also holding water. So this is the simplest characterization, where you have a green alga, one photobiont, and one microbiont. Here's one where you have a little bump with fungal tissue and a different photobiont up there, probably cyanobacteria. I'll show you some specimens of a local one of this, which is a flat planar one that grows in the ground. And then you see these, wherever, as implied in the drawing here, wherever you have the presence of the other photobiont, you have a different morphological interaction with the fungus, so you can see where they are. This other one, let's see, I think is another fungus, and then you've got another lichen on top. They have lichenicolous lichens that are associated with other lichens, and this is one with 3 different photobionts. So, but the common things, these are the 2 common ones, and this sometimes. I don't see lichenicolous lichens often, but they're very subtle. They're sometimes on things that people have collected, and in England particularly, they were interested in them 2 or 3 decades ago, and we're catching on in North America. Okay, structure of the thallus. This is a lichen called brook lichen, dermatocarpum luridum. This is with it dry, just above the water, and there it is wet. You can see the water. It grows on rocks right next to the water and streams, and when it's dry, it has this sort of grayish brown, bluish gray color. When it's green, you see it looks much more green, and it's because, I guess, because the algae are happy. they had water, and they're able to photosynthesize. Now, this is scanning electron micrograph and a diagram of the layers again, where you have the upper cortex here. See how dense it is, and also on the bottom. And then the black dots in B are the green alga. The medulla is loose, and on the bottom it has rhizines or things that hold it to the substrate on the bottom, coming out of the lower cortex. This is a foliose lichen. In fruticose lichens, which are shrub-like, and I'll talk again about the different forms of lichens this afternoon. This is a cladonia called the powdered horn lichen. It has a primary thallus, and then it has these things that stick up out of it called medetia. In these kinds of things, you have a hollow interior, and then so you have an outer cortex sometimes, and then you have the green alga around the edge, but not outside. So rhizines are structures that hold the lichen firmly on the substrate, and they grow on rocks. They grow in rocks, sometimes if it's porous. And they're usually crustose when they're of when they have that behavior. They also grow on trees, on dead trees, on the soil, even on things like long-lived tortoise shells. Very interesting. So just some of the forms. This is a crust on bark. These are folios, and these are fruticose. They're shrub-like. There are a couple of other forms, I think, here. Yeah, there are a couple more. So crustose or crust-like, fruticose, shrub-like, foliose, leaf-like, obviously. Squamulose is a little less obvious. This is flaky or shingle-like, and I have some pictures of it in a minute. And umbilicate is really a subset of folios with they're often this big, some of them, and they have a single point of attachment with a really big, strong kind of structure that holds it on rock, usually on vertical surfaces. We'll look at these later too. Okay, so I'm going to do a gallery now of some of these forms and some of the species. This is crustose. It's on rock. It's on stone. It's on sandstone in the Catskills, east of here, about 100 miles. Where you have the bright mint green one is the maple dust lichen, which also grows on trees, and dust lichen is the gray one. And this stuff is Physia, which is another genus of foliose lichens. These are crustose. And also maybe there's a bryophyte in there. But this is the kind of abstract painting you can see if you have your eyes open. You really like this. This one is fascinating because of its very, very focused microhabitat. This is called the Sulphur Dust lichen, also on Catskill sandstone. And if you go to cliffs, particularly those that are shaded, or on the north side of stone walls, down at the base where they don't get much sun and where it's moist, this beautiful sulfur yellow lichen, which is just powder. It's a powdery kind of texture to it. It doesn't have a cortex, in other words, grows. And you can see this on campus on the stone wall around the herb garden at the Arboretum. Here's another abstract painting that sort of swirls around. This one that's flat on rock, which is limestone, is Peter's ink lichen, Placentium petersii, and the black diagonal in the middle is a moss. I think it's the genus Crimea. But this is a rare thing because it's rare to have outcropping limestone. As like they call it limestone pavement. It's miles and miles and miles of this, and it's got all these wonderful lichens that are and plants and everything else, or butterflies and so on, that are sort of confined to that kind of habitat. Another crustose group are called jewel lichens in the genus Caloplaca. There are at least two species there, a yellow one and a bright red-orange one. These are apothecia pretty much on the top of the rock. This is a fascinating local one. It's easy to find if you know yellow birch. It likes to grow on the bark, and it's got the redundant name of Graphis scripta. It's much like trailing arbutus in the wildflowers, which is called Epigaya repens, which means on the earth. Anyway, this one means it looks like writing or pen marks. And these are actually, the marks are the apothecia of the fungal partner, and they occur as long slits with the asci inside. Eldon script is the common name. Okay, this one has a rather hilarious common name of green smear lichen, which is always on rotting acid wood. It's usually on hemlock in my experience. You can see little black dots, which are the epiphysia of the fungal partner on a beautiful jade green color. This is another micro-focused habitat like the sulfur dust one, the same color actually. This is sulfur stubble lichen, which is in a different group. It's an ascomycete, but it doesn't have an epiphysium, it has a mesothelium. And you probably know what that means by now. It's got a stalk with a little swelling on the top where the asci are disorganized. They're not in a chimenian way. They are in distal seeds. Anyway, this one grows on soil on the underside of north-facing trees that have flopped over in the swamp. So they pull up their big rootstock. There's a little pool there. If the exposed soil faces north, they have the right exposure and the right level of humidity, and I have a game with myself when I'm in habitats like that to try to find it, and I usually can if I'm lucky and look hard enough. But this one is a fun thing to find, and this is characteristic of some of the crust, particularly if you know exactly the kind of microhabitat to look, you can find it. And maybe that's true of many things in the world. Okay, this is squamulose lichen, as I mentioned this a minute ago. This is the oyster lichen, and these little flakes are the squamules. In this case, they look like oyster shells, and it's also been called the clam lichen for the same reason. You can see the scale, 1 millimeter on the bottom. This is a lichen I did a study of for several years and published a paper on. These are usually on dead wood or living tree bark that is pH 4. I think it's very acid substrate. They grow right on the campus. They used to grow I think they grow on white oak trees by Lincoln Hall on the art squad, and they used to have this huge silver maple in front of the chemistry building before they put the addition in that had it on. It's also on pines in the Arboretum. It particularly likes pines. This one is a fruticose lichen, or it's within that category at least. This is about 1 centimeter tall when it's well developed, and maybe half that tall around here. It's usually pinker on top. This is it's called pink Berth Lichen, and this was on roadsides in Maine where the whole roadsides were like salmon colored because of huge growths of this lichen. It has a primary thallus on the bottom that's crustose, the bluish gray looking stuff, and then out of it come these little mushroom-like things. But this is an asco lichen, and the puff top is the top of the hymeneum. And the color, when you see a lichen like this that has spots of color, it usually is, if it's an ascomycete, it usually is the paraphyses that are colored around the asci. So it's interesting. This is a cladonia that is, it's just little bunches of squamules. And you see how it's darker behind it? This is another microhabitat thing. This is usually in hot exposed places, and it will choose the place where there's a rain channel. So this is interesting, just as another squamulose species. It's also fruticose because it has pieces of it that come up out of the thallus that are like the other one I showed. Now this is a well-known one. This is British soldiers, Cladonia cristodula, which is, the name dates back, the common name dates back to the Revolutionary War with thread coats in this country. This is on dead wood, but it's also on soil often. It's an early successional thing. It's very rare to find this in its natural state. I found square yards of them in the Albany pine bush and fired this climax pine barrens kind of situation where I think it was probably in primeval state. It's something pretty rare. You see it more often on construction things after 2 or 3 years. This one is another fruticose lichen, horn lichen, Cladonia uncialis, which looks like a deer's horns. This is often in pine barrens or on other exposed pine oak wood situations on the ground. This is the common reindeer lichen, which I've seen around here on South Hill and in Coy Glen. This has the bluish-gray color of, it's distinctive for the color, and this is very shrub-like. And I have examples of this for us to look at this afternoon. And This group, genus Cladina, is interesting because each node is like a conifer with 1 year's growth, so you can count how old it is. And like in this space, it might be 20 years old. They did that for a while when I was much younger. This is maybe the most beautiful of the Cladinas, the Reindeer Lichens, with one other exception, which is similar. This is the powder puff lichen Cladina advancii, named for Alexander Evans of Yale, who I mentioned earlier. And this is on in a pine flatwoods in Florida. And they have these beautiful beige-colored leaves have fallen. I think they were oaks, probably, with this ghosty white-colored lichen. And this is used in. I have a bag of it that I'll bring this afternoon that I found in Michael's. They use it in arts and crafts, and I think they soaked it in glycerin. They're very, very brittle. If you soak them in glycerin, they're more flexible. Here's another kind of fruticose. Rather than growing up, it hangs down. This is an Adirondack bog, and this on the right are trees that are dead that are covered with lichens, and there's a close-up here. There's quite a community. You have foliose ones here, and then the coarser one is the Herbarium mesomorpha, and there's smaller branched ones called Wisnea, which are old man's beard. Common name. This is also called old man's beard. This is genus Bryoria, and a number of others. There probably are at least a dozen, if not more, species on these branches. And this is a primeval situation at the edge of the bog. Wonderful habitats there to see things as they are. One thing I noticed is that in successional habitats like we've created for 200 years around here, lichen that are foliose may be about this big, around 3 or 4 inches across. In the Adirondacks, when you find them in a situation like that, they'll be this big around and they will have application on them. And you don't see that in younger ones. They always say rare in the books, so it's interesting to see the difference. Now this is a character that shows up once in a while at the plant Herbarium. This was on Halloween, I think, 2 years ago, with a costume made of old man's beard. Don't laugh too. Okay, fruticose lichens on trees. This is the lace lichen from the west coast. This is from Corvallis, Oregon. It's all the way along the west coast. You can see the lacy structure of the thallus. These are absolutely magnificent to see. I have a friend who was a lichenologist who had a lapel decoration for his wedding made out of this lichen. This is another kind of fruticose lichen. This is on soil and rock in the Alvar Barrens on limestone pavement. It's also on sand on the coastal plain around the Great Lakes, and in here and there on ledges, including one of the ones in town here, where they are post-glacial relics. This is used to be called Iceland moss, which is actually Centraria Icelandica. But this one is split out from that. It's called Centraria arenaria, which means liking sand. Arenarium. So this is a rare thing, but it has this fruticose shape. It's in a genus that's usually foliose. Okay, now foliose, finally. Mentioning they're leafy lichens, and there are several of them here, but the two that are important are the blue-gray one and the greenish-yellow one, which are very common and easy to identify. They're on the trees along Tower Road, for example, and around Beaver Lake. The smaller ones in the middle are Physias, another genus, and they're very good colonizers. They have little structures called ceridia that are about 20th of a millimeter in diameter that fly around in the air and get them around. The other one is Icidia, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, this is another example of a large foliose one that's on, this is the big one in the middle, which is on rock. There's a crust on the right. This is Xanthoparmelia, meaning yellow-green color. And you can see the bed of epiphysia and the bigger part of it on the right. Here's the lungwort, and the thalli of these are literally this big. They're just so wonderful, and you can see Down in here, you can see the sort of the puckering and ridging of the thallus. If you turn it over, it's mottled beige and brown. And this is something, it's called lungwort because it looks like lung tissue. And this name dates from the era of herbals when people thought that plants or other things in the environment that looked like an organ could be used to help with diseases of that group. So that's hence the name Honorary. This is the genus Peltigera. This is a pepper dog lichen, which has a propagule called Isidia all over the top. On soil, it's usually on limy soil. And this one, see the color, it's so different than the others. This grayish blue color indicates a cyanobacterial fungus. And this is a rock tripe. Now, this is an umbilicate one. This is a cluster of them. This is Umbilicarium annulata on vertical cliffs. And the stuff in the background, all the little blue and gray things are crusts. But this one, the thalli are 8 or 10 inches across sometimes. It's smaller too. And they also they reproduce by little fragments that catch and grow in the rock. So here's a close-up. And as I said, they have it's the genus Umbilicarium, family Umbilicariaceae, and they have this structure called an umbilicus that attaches it to the rock. And you can see the wrinkles here where the umbilicus is on the underside. The underside is black. The top is a beautiful sort of grayish, greenish brown, and it sometimes has other lichens growing on it. So that's one kind of rock tripe. This is a little smaller. This one is called the toadskin lichen, Lasalia papulosa. And here's one, and here's one, and here's one, and here's one, etc. And right in the lightest colored spot is where the umbilicus is, and these are beige underneath. They're absolutely beautiful. This one is another one in the same genus, Lasalia pennsylvanica, on Shangam quartzite down by the Hudson River with lots of growth of other ones among them. These are much bigger. They're probably sometimes almost not quite a foot in diameter. Now this is a local one that is not a rock tripe that looks like one. It has the umbilicate form, but rock tripes like acidic rocks, and most of the rocks around here have a lime influence at least. And this one is one that the cliff wafer, Dermatocrupum miniatum, which grows on limey rocks. And they're usually the size of fingernails, these tiny little ones, and these huge ones, which is, again, in this situation, which is probably undisturbed, are maybe 3 inches across. This is down near Watkins Glen. And there's a puckery surface with little black dots, and the dots are the top of perithecia that are buried in the thallus, as opposed to open epiphyseal. Now, some vegetative reproduction strategies. The simplest way, again, diagrams here, the simplest way is just a piece breaking off, like a squirrel or a fox or something goes over a leg and steps on it, breaks it a little bit, it flies away in the wind and lands and starts a new individual. There are two micro forms of fragmentation that are included in all keys in lichen books because they're so important diagnostically. One of them is Isidia, which is shown in this one, where you have, remember the layers here with the cortices and the medulla, and then the photoglyphs here. These finger-like projections come up, or little barrel-like projections come up out of the cortex, and part of the medulla with the alga in it go up into it. Then these break off, and they can be as long as 2 millimeters. They're tiny, but you can see them with your bare eye, and we'll look at these this afternoon. The other way, this is not as common as this one in H, where you have the same structure, but instead of having something grow out of the cortex, you have a breakout of things from the medulla, and it's a globose mass of algae with the fungal hyphae around them. And as I said, these are about a 20th of a millimeter in size. They're very tiny. This is some that are from breaks in the cortex on the top, and sometimes they're on the edge of lobes. So they're called Ceridia, and we'll get to this later. So here's the antler lichen, and where the red arrow is, you can see the acidia. There are those tiny little pieces along the branches. And this one is a ceridiate one. They're less obvious. They're powdery. And over here, right in there, you can see them. And this one, the red arrow, and this is curled up lobes that are just covered with ceridia on the underside of hydrogen. The FSO is the puff shield lichen. These are common in wetlands usually. And then the oyster lichen that I talked about before, these are the squamules, and they have a, I think I can use the pointer. They have a, this is the surface of the squamule, and then see all these little round things that are eroding out of the bottom? They are the ceridia. So the scale, remember, with this whole structure is about 1 millimeter. And so here are blows, I forget what they're up here, 470 times versus 282 here. That's the ends, but that's an actual picture of ceridia. Now here's a cross-section of an epiphysium of a lichen, where you see, and all of this stuff is glittery and green, all the way up to the edge of the margin of the epiphysium is it's the algal partner, and then the fungal partner provides the structure, and of course the hymenous fungal. So just Ascomyces spore diagrams to show the variation within organized fungi in that group. I like the uniform ones in J best myself. They're beautiful, sometimes they're huge. Some rock types have huge brickwork type ascospores like that, but many of them are simple or just have a few septa. And these are taxonomic characters for genera species. Now let's talk about further again. Lichen habitats in ecology, they grow in all kinds of habitats from beaches and at sea level, even in seawater sometimes, to the windswept tops of mountains. Many kinds of bleak landscapes are softened by the gentle artistry of these things. This is one characteristic of alpine summits called the mat lichen, as a Carpine geographically, which has a jet black outer area, sort of a brilliant green, a yellowish green color, sort of in here. These are old slides that were made from elm, and in the old days we didn't work very well with tumors, so this is a background sort of shows the color, but they're very distinct. This is again the Arctoparmelia, and you see now the mat lichen around it there. And the other ones, those small things, are other lichens. This is pine barrens on sandstone pavement, which you also see on sand, which is, you can see it, pavement of rock or sandstone is just consolidated sand. It breaks up into sand. So same kind of situation, very hot. And if the humidity is right, you get masses of lichens. They can even dominate the landscapes. If you go to Cape Cod in Massachusetts or places in New Jersey or eastern Long Island, you can see this. And in the Arctic too, and up much farther north. The blue or the red here is blueberry. Now this is pine barrens on the top of quartzite outcrops in the Shandon Mountains between Kingston and Port Jervis in New York. And you see the ledge here. If you get a different view of it, they're rather sobering chasms. And they have this huge cap rock on a narrow ridge that goes from the Hudson all the way to Pennsylvania. And deep down in these 50 to 150 foot deep clefts, you get a different kind of biota growing, much more boreal. And right here you can see the top of Mountain Ash, which is a northern tree, and down in the crevices you can find other things, including the mat lichen and Arctoparmelia. This is 50 miles from New York City, down in the earth as opposed to on top of the mountain. And this is an evidence of a relative distribution from the end of glaciation. And the reason they're here, I think, is because these chasms fill up with ice, at least they used to. And so that people could throw snowballs on the 4th of July if they were down in here. According Imagineering, and who wrote a wonderful essay about these habitats. And so and you can see there's sort of sun on some of it and not on this one. When you're down in something that's shaped like this, and you've got like a V, and the sun is overhead, you get just a little window of sun, and that lichen is arranged itself to take full advantage when the sun is out, where the sun is out. This is another boreal one. It's got yellow ceredia on the edges. This is a whirly swirly one. I love this lichen, golden blue gold lichen, beautifully named by, that one is a broader name from the book. This is on sandstone up in Watertown, New York. It's not very common. This is a similar kind of growth on sandstone from the Catskills. This is the sandstone from New York. This gray one is a fruticose one, again, sample Cornell, which is fruticose, and another fruticose one on the upper corner. And the gray one is foam lichen in the genus Stereocolumn, which these aren't very common around here, but they do exist. Now this is an anomaly where you have limestone pavement barrens, which are, of course, calcareous, and then you've got a chunk of the Adirondack granite sitting here as an erratic with its own flora growing around things that are indicators of flying, like the cedar in the foreground. It's fascinating. Now, use is just some real, what we've been talking about is ecology, but this is more dramatic ecology where birds are using lichens in nest building. The one on the left is the northern Parula warbler, which is, it draws together pieces of these hanging old man's beard type of lichens in which to nest. And then the other is the ruby-throated hummingbird. This is the female without the throat. And she does all of the nest building and rearing herself. Doesn't help with it. In fact, he's building away after the beginning. So this is, as you can see, it's covered with what I like to think of as a mosaic of pieces of lichen here. And this, you know how these birds sit and, they just like sort of float and zoom around. She would have to hover and take her bill and pick the lichen and tear it off. They're pieces that are about, quarter of an inch maybe, and then fly to the nest and fix it. And she uses, the nest is built of plant down that's held together with spider webs and insect silk. So and these two beautiful little oval white eggs inside. And then it's got this mosaic around the outside, often blue-green lichens, including Cornell saccata is here, but sometimes with the yellow-green one that we saw, with the other blue-green one, the bigger one. So it's just the whole thing is fascinating. There are other birds, blue-gray gnatcatcher and vireos and wood pewee or other ones in our fauna around here who ornament their nests with lichens as opposed to actually making the nest out of lichens or plain lichens. There's a guild of moths called lichen moths that feed on these organisms too. Notice the monarch-like warming coloring. They probably, lichens, the two components of lichens produce unique chemical compounds. Many of them are acids that are useful through TLC in taxonomy, but they also impart a very nasty taste to the thallus. And so I think that property is translated into the life cycle of the moth by the larvae feeding on it. And by the way, the larvae they don't eat fungal parts, they just eat the green alga. Now, uses of lichens on this time. A dry cedar line railroad corridor at Medina, New York. There's a clue there. Okay, see the little trees? Now here's the lichen that's grayish green that looks like those trees, which indeed it is. This is a Star Trek Reindeer lichen, Boggans, which is similar to the one in Florida. This is the one that occurs in the Northeast. It's a boreal thing. They're absolutely beautiful. And this was used commercially in model railroads and architectural models. I remember when I was young seeing them, and in modern times we'd see more styrofoam. But they make very nice little shrubs. And they're often painted. And as I said, I saw it in Michael's the other day, something like this, except the other one before. And And even in this railroad model, this is the Donia cristata, the red crest lichen being used as a rose arbor. These must be one. I mean, it's fun to look at this kind of stuff and just see how they put them together. But having a natural component helping them do it is very interesting. Now, other uses, oak mosses, the genus Avernia, are baled and used for extracting verniastic oil, which holds fragrances in French and Italian perfumes. And this is in Europe. The same one occurs in the west coast in this continent. And we have one in the east that's a little different. We'll look at this afternoon too. This is Herbarium mesomorphoboreal oak moss here. And as far as I know, it's not been used that way in America. Other lichens are used in dyes too. You may be familiar with litmus paper from high school biology or something like that, which is an acid-base indicator. This is made from a lichen called Lepella, which grows along the ocean and rocks. This is a loom in Scotland where Harris tweed was being produced, and this is a woolen, very fine woolen fabric that was dyed with lichens historically. I don't know if they make them anymore, but this is a picture of the historical process. Sometimes they grow so vigorously that they aren't welcome, and this is an example. Another situation is if you have ancient carvings where the acid and lichens can sort of erode it away over a long time, and they can also etch the glass of cathedrals in Europe that are 1,000 years old. So to get rid of it, people have used fungicides, but an easier way probably is just to cover it over until the lichen dies, and then take a brush, some water, and brush it off. Okay, people have long been interested in these, and you can see these little cherubs here. If you look closely, there's even a reindeer in the background. And we're looking at a reindeer lichen. This is from Hoffman's Descriptio et Adumbradio Plantarum and Cryptogamica, Volume 3 from 1801. A very nice historical picture of lichens. Oh, the two books. I have these here to show you this afternoon. This is The Lichens in North America by Grotto. Oops, sorry. This one is by Grotto and the Charnos, who are photographers, which has, it's enormous and very heavy, and it has several hundreds of magnificent color photographs. The other one is a very fine, it's the best lichen book I have ever seen in terms of its design and content of macrolichens in New England, which also works in New York because we're so close to them latitudinally and physically. So we'll look at these later. So this is, as I said at the beginning, like learning about lichens is lonely, frustrating, and difficult. And this is a photograph of a gathering of people at the Tuckerman Lichen Workshop on the Alvar vegetation by Watertown. And I can show you Grotto is the guy with the beard. This is me when he was younger. This is Dick Harris from New York Botanical Garden, who is our guru, so to speak. And this is Patricia and James Hines of the New England Lichen book, and the other people are from Maryland and Illinois and Harvard and so forth. This idea of people who are interested, these are mostly amateurs, but some professionals as well. Mostly people with high enthusiasm and knowledge level who get together 4 or 5 days, stay at a wonderful resort, have a room reserved a lab like this where bring all their microscopes and stuff. And it's a way to learn and share with people who know how to find all these things outdoors. It's a wonderful thing. It's still going on. They had 40 or 50 people come. They've gone all over the Northeast and all the way to the Mississippi and beyond into the Ozarks and Arizona, Arkansas. So there we go. Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.